Good morning, South Africa. Last week, we were once again plunged into rolling blackouts, and there is more load shedding to come. In 2015, if you can remember, Cyril Ramaphosa promised to confine load shedding to the dustbin of history within 18 months, and yet here we are again. This week, we take a look at what South Africa can do to survive rolling blackouts, and we explore what the DA's plan is to free us all from Eskom. But first, we take a look at the week in headlines.
Postponing the 2021 local government elections might still happen. The IEC is not ruling out that possibility just yet.
Government has performed an 11th hour climb down, it seems, and has offered to enter into settlement talks with the public sector unions over salary increases that it had previously said were unaffordable.
Gun owners are furious as government revealed proposed changes to the law that would remove self-defense as a valid reason to own a firearm.
The Democratic Alliance is heading to court in an effort to force the ANC to hand over cadre deployment records.
And as winter approaches, the country is bracing for the third wave of COVID-19 infections. Many fear harsher lockdown restrictions. And the question on everyone's minds, well, if you're a drinker at least, is will alcohol face another ban?
Scores of DA members and structures participated in what the party calls the country's first major virtual political rally in the run-up to the local government elections.
This week in the headlines, the DA is going to court over the ANC's policy of cadre deployment. The IEC is looking into postponing this year's local government elections, and government is coming for your firearms. But first, in the coming weeks, South Africa faces the spectre of another lockdown. Why? Because the ANC government can't roll out the vaccine, and the health minister is now embroiled in a fresh COVID corruption scandal. The alcohol industry knows what's coming next. This week, they met with government to preempt another alcohol ban. We are all worried about a third wave. The way to survive it and other possible waves is to speed up the rollout of the vaccine. This is what the DA is telling government. Get the health minister out of the way. Call in the private sector. Ask Alan Windey and the DA-led Western Cape government for advice. Use the infrastructure that already works. Otherwise, we will be stuck in an endless cycle of lockdowns. One reason the state can't get anything done is because of cadre deployment. Instead of confining their politicians to parliament, it is ANC policy to appoint party agents to civil service jobs that require technical skills and political impartiality. Who is fighting to stop this? The DA is. We're going to court. We want to see the minutes of those cadre deployment committee meetings, the ones chaired by Cyril Ramaphosa when he was still Jacob Zuma's loyal deputy. The ANC cannot claim that these documents are private. They have enormous public implications. Imagine if some of our judges and even the public protector were appointed at the behest of an ANC cadre deployment committee. You can support the DA's fight against cadre deployment by visiting outlawcadredeployment.co.za. Last week, Police Minister Becky Cele published a bill that proposes to take away the right of South Africans to own firearms for self-defense. This is the same police minister who can't account for the breakdown of the DNA database and the chaotic state of the firearms registry. While the minister himself enjoys the benefit of armed bodyguards at, by the way, a cost of 10 million rand a year to taxpayers, he wants to take away your means of self-defense. This seems to be the trend. The ANC doesn't know how to exercise the power it already has, but it wants more. Help the DA to fight for your right to self-defense. Sign the petition at da.org.za. It is deeply worrying that the IEC has initiated a process to review the election date of 27 October this year. Is it just a ploy by a divided ANC to buy themselves more time? The IEC has already proven that it's capable of holding free, fair, and safe elections, even in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. The DA is ready for these elections. We stand firm in the belief that all South Africans must be given the opportunity to make their voices heard through the ballot box later this year. As I said, we're ready. We don't care if the ANC is not ready. We are determined to bring change to South Africa. It's what we so desperately need. And finally, the DA held an historic virtual rally last weekend with a clear message. Even in the midst of bad news, corruption, the breakdown of services, the pandemic, there is one party that can get things done, the DA. Between dazzling performances by South Africa's top artists, we have shown that where we govern, we deliver. But we need your help. Please sign our pledge at timeforchange.org.za, and we also urge South Africans to make a contribution at donate.da.org.za. The DA will not fund its election campaign through taxpayers' money, through tenders and looting. We need contributions by honest, hard-working South Africans. Your contribution will assist our campaign to bring change to your community. In the spotlight this week, as load shedding hits the nation yet again, we look at whether or not it's possible to rid South Africa of Eskom and rolling blackouts once and for all. Let's take a look at the story in the spotlight.
Surprise, surprise, Eskom is implementing stage 2 load shedding from 9 o'clock tonight.
South Africans should brace themselves for more load shedding over the next 5 years.
Eskom's forecast for power cuts show that for the months ahead, South Africans will find themselves in the dark.
Load shedding is back and technical malfunctions are behind the power cuts.
What's taking so long to actually make sure that the coal power stations are finally maintained properly?
Eskom CEO Andre de Ruyter says the power utility has a shortfall in the electricity supply.
One is wondering about those that do not have a backup plan, the small businesses that actually rely on power to even survive and stay open.
The total economic impact of load shedding in South Africa could be as high as 338 billion rand.
Eskom's broken promises on load shedding are catching up with the utility.
How are we going to get it right eventually? Does this have anything to do with a lack of skills and incompetence?
I want to take you back to April 2008, the start of significant load shedding in South Africa, when we first had to get to grips with life without power. Then in 2015, Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa was tasked with turning around Eskom. At the time, he announced, and I quote, "In another 18 months to 2 years, you will forget the challenges we had in relation to power and energy in Eskom ever happened." Famous last words. But here in 2021, rolling blackouts have only become worse. A few years ago, we reached stage 6 load shedding for the first time. That means 10 hours a day without power. On top of load shedding, the hard lockdown has forced many businesses to close their doors, while others are barely hanging on. And just in time for the commencement of South Africa's already delayed mass vaccination program, load shedding is set to get worse. Will clinics in rural communities have the generator backup power needed to keep vaccines in cold storage? Or will they have to dump tens of thousands of vaccines from thawed out fridges? Even if we didn't have to contend with all of these problems, South Africa's electricity constraints means that we cannot grow more than 2% of GDP per year. To discuss all of this and more, we're joined in studio by the DA's Shadow Minister for Mineral Resources, Kevin Mileham, the author of the book Blackout, the Eskom Crisis, James-Brent Styan, and the DA's political head of the Joburg Northwest constituency, Bridget Masango. Welcome to the Inside Track. James, I want to start with you. You're here in your personal capacity. You authored the book, Blackout, the Eskom Crisis. Please tell us, what is at the heart of this electricity crisis in South Africa? Why can government not keep the lights on?
Hi, good to be here. So in essence, the generating capacity of Eskom has been completely run down. And Eskom itself has explained over the past 10 years, as demand has increased and they've been unable to keep up with demand, they've been running their existing generators even harder. They call it running it in the red zone, and they've been running their power stations at capacities of up to 90%, which is higher than the global average standard. So very old power stations, on average, the power units at Eskom is about 40 years old. So some of them are 50, some of them are even older. So if you're running a 1970s Toyota Corolla or whatever car at 150 k's an hour all the time, it's going to break down, and when the breakdown happens, it's going to be significant.
And skipping the services.
And skipping the services because there's no capacity, there's no spare capacity, and the problem it snowballs, so it gets increasingly worse. So you've got a tremendous lack of political will from national government side. You've got something that's caught up with us now. For many years before the load shedding crisis, electricity tariffs were very, very low. So Eskom never put away money for a rainy day to build new power plants, and so now you're sitting with a two-edged sword. They've had to increase electricity tariffs significantly. I believe the number is something like 400% in the last 7 years. Just incredible amount and it continues to increase 15% per year over the next 3 years. That excludes the increase your local municipality is going to add on top of it. So your electricity price is going to get even higher in efforts to help Eskom with its finance problem, because now the generation problem, they decided in 2007-8 to build 2 mega power plants, and they were caught out with their pants down in a sense, and they had to build very quickly. So they did it without doing sufficient pre-planning, pre-engineering, pre-financing.
This is Cilliers and Medupi.
This is Cilliers and Medupi. So initially they were planning to have these up and running by Medupi was meant to be done by 2015. Cilliers was meant to be done by 2018. They were going to cost about 90 billion each. It's now 14 years later. 2021, neither Medupi nor Cilliers is finished, and the cost of those projects have escalated to above 250 billion each, roughly. So, and that has dumped Eskom into the biggest financial crisis ever. And to give you an idea, very briefly, SAA, South African Airways, the hole they're in is about 25 billion rand. That's why they are no longer flying and in serious financial problems. Eskom made a financial loss last year, 1 year financial loss of about 21 billion rand. In 1 year. This year, they're in all likelihood going to see an increase in that loss. So if you're making losses in excess of 20 billion per year, I don't see how you're going to be financially solvent and able to meet your obligations moving forward. We're not even speaking about the current wage negotiations where labor unions are demanding 15%. So in a nutshell, lack of proper political will. Eskom wasn't allowed to build new power stations from 1994 until 2007, and by that time we were hit with load shedding. They had to build very quickly, and the building project has been a complete disaster. And now we're stuck with a problem, and I can tell you for free, we're probably going to be load shed for at least 10 years, significantly load shed. And if the correct decisions aren't taken now, we can expect load shedding probably forever.
So, Kevin, James compares Eskom to a 1988 Corolla that hasn't been serviced. I think it's probably less reliable than a 1988
Absolutely.
Corolla. And you know, there seems to be very little prospect of saving Eskom itself. You've said that government needs to get out of the electricity generation business. What is the prospect of privatized electricity generation in this country?
Well, let me be very clear. The first thing that we need to do is not say we want to get Eskom completely out of or government completely out of the electricity generation sector. We say that they need to be one player amongst many. We can't be totally reliant on Eskom for all our power.
To break its monopoly.
So it's to break that monopoly. There are a couple of things that need to happen. The first thing is that we need to open up our electricity generation space. We can start by raising the threshold of licensing from currently 1 megawatt, where they need to get a license from NERSA, to 50 megawatts. And this is something that business, that civil society, that various organizations and entities are putting on the table, and Gwede Mantashe, the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, has said, no, we're going to limit it to 10 megawatts. That doesn't really open up the space for utility scale generation, or not even utility scale, but large business scale generation, because that's where the real saving of electricity is going to come from. If you can free up the smelters, the mines, if you can take them off grid, or even off-grid for some of the time, it's going to allow the rest of the generation capacity to catch up with demand. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we need to really incentivize people to install their own generation. We need to encourage them, both residential, business, and municipalities, to go into generation for themselves. We need to make it easier for them to do that. We need to make the licensing process, the registration process, much simpler. NERSA have a very rigorous process that they follow. The process, if you want to generate your own electricity for a business, let's say you're a small mine and you want to generate your own electricity and you need 50 megawatts. You go through the exact same process that Medupi and Cilliers that James was talking about, that they go through in terms of public participation, licensing and registration. And that's unacceptable. There needs to be a streamlined process, make it easier. That's what we need to do right now.
So you outlined the reforms that need to be done. What is going on with Gwede Mantashe? Because he seems that the president says one thing and then Gwede Mantashe doesn't. What motivates this minister?
So I think Gwede Mantashe has a couple of issues. First of all, I think he's stuck in an ideological mindset from the 1970s and 1980s where...
He is a 1988 Toyota Corolla.
He is a 1988 Toyota Corolla, yes. So I think
hasn't been serviced.
I think...
and needs replacing.
I think that's one issue. The second, I think, is he is badly advised. I think that government as a whole has done very poor planning. One of the challenges we've had over the years is that the Integrated Resource Plan, which is essentially South Africa's energy roadmap, electricity roadmap, which is supposed to be updated every couple of years, was only updated last 2019. October 2019 it was accepted. But it was already 10 years since the previous version had been updated. So we're way behind in our electricity planning and we're not forward planning. I've challenged Gwede Mantashe. I said to him, go out and bring us an IRP every 2 years. Let's review the situation. Let's see what's working and what's not, and let's put that on the table. Let's have those discussions. We're not having the discussions.
James, Kevin has said you need that expert advice in a political office. You know, politicians aren't necessarily the technical experts about this. Is this a big part of the problem that we have?
I think so. I mean, I can't understand. If you become a national cabinet minister or any senior position in government, you enter often a portfolio where you haven't perhaps had real experience, and I doubt. Gwede Mantashe comes from the unions. I don't see what his background in energy is. So one has to ask the question.
He's a coal miner.
One has to ask the question: who is advising him on energy policy? It's a question that in my view should be asked. And are those people independent enough? Are they experienced enough to understand the realities of the world we're living in and the needs for the country moving forward? You're talking about the IRP. It's legislated. The IRP should be revised and published every 2 years. But it's never been done. No. And there's just been zero accountability for that. The IRP predicts what our energy needs are going to be and how this is going to be satisfied by which technology. It's a whole roadmap and it needs to be updated regularly because the world changes in the energy environment so rapidly. It's never been updated regularly. As I said, the last one was in 2010 and now this one in 2019. It's supposed to be done every 2 years. It's never been done. So we are always on the back foot. We are always working off old data, of old assumptions, of old cost assumptions, of old predictions. And this is not a good place to be if you want to plan and if you want to invest the sort of money you need to get a country out of a load shedding hole that it's in.
Yeah. So that's the politicians and the technical stuff. Bridget, you represent the constituency of Joburg Northwest, and it's been hit by a lot of blackouts. Tell us, and you've brought petitions in this regard to Parliament, I know. Tell us how this is affecting ordinary people.
Well, Cilliers, thank you so much for having me today. You know, having started with Johannesburg Northwest out of Tshwane in Bronkhorstspruit, I was hit by a whole lot of people who were affected by the outages. But the most strangest and most scariest thing that has happened is that when you have a load shedding, an official one or a formal one. These areas...
A scheduled one.
Yes, a scheduled one. Yes, that's the right word.
Not like you get advance notice these days.
No. So these areas of Bromhof, of Boskrane, of North Riding and surrounding areas, they will then have what I could call a residual outage that just stays with them. I mean, if I can give you an example of, I think it was in December somewhere where we had a outage, a load shedding, and then these people had 11 hours after the formal scheduled load shedding that everyone had. And these are the people that were now sitting in lockdown, some of them working from home, some of them having bought some food with whatever money they had before they lost their jobs. And all this went to waste because of load shedding. It's been an uphill battle. I mean, the councillors, Councillor Cilliers and Councillor Alexander, who are sharing the wards which are covering these areas, are saying that this goes back as far back as 2018 for some of these areas, where people just have nowhere to go because they have no electricity, they can't communicate with the outside world, they cannot cook for their children. It's just a mess in those areas. This is why when I heard and I was getting all these messages, I thought maybe let's do a petition as one of the things to do to actually see if something can happen here, because people are not getting any response from the city of Johannesburg. They have invited the MMC of Environment and Infrastructure, but nothing, still to this day, actually, nothing has happened. Yesterday, I was speaking to one of the councillors. He could not get back to me because he was sitting in an outage. This is how deep and how the implications of this problem that we are facing is actually putting people in all sorts of areas.
And we'll talk about the things in local municipalities that bedevil or that complicate the issue of load shedding.
Most definitely.
The DA Western Cape-led government is taking measures to become the first province in the country to become Eskom and load shedding free. Let's have a look at this.
Have you noticed how, when most of South Africa gets that dreaded load shedding notification, Cape Town often gets a clear forecast? This is with the help of the Styan pumped storage power scheme, which picks up the slack whenever possible. The DA-led city of Cape Town is a perfect example of how governments can innovate to make our power supply more reliable. They are leading the way by installing rooftop solar systems on city buildings, by retrofitting traffic and streetlights with LED lamps, and by installing smart electricity meters. The city's waste-to-energy project is even working to turn the harmful greenhouse gas the city extracts from our rubbish into electricity. This is all in pursuit of keeping the lights on. If we look to the DA-run Western Cape at large, a priority is to enhance the uptake of rooftop solar PV at businesses, such as on the roof of this Cape Town shopping centre. Because we've got to keep our economy working. DA-run governments are also promoting innovation through the installation of solar panels on the roofs of schools and clinics so that these facilities can keep operating during load shedding. In fact, the DA is on a nationwide mission to free all South Africans from Eskom's monopoly. This includes urging our national government to open up our grid and allow the private sector to compete with Eskom to supply electricity on a level playing field. To change the law so businesses and individuals can sell the extra electricity they generate onto the grid for others to use. To offer a 75,000 Rand tax rebate to cover the cost of installing solar systems in homes to take the pressure off the grid. To zero-rate VAT on LED light bulbs and energy-efficient appliances. And to allow municipalities to purchase power directly from independent power producers rather than having to rely on Eskom. The DA is doing everything possible to get our national government to step aside and let the private sector, provinces and municipalities get on with the job of keeping the lights on, keeping businesses and industry working and ensuring that our economy grows.
So get government to step aside and let the private sector do what needs to be done. That's the DA's plan, Kevin. What is the most important first step from that plan that now needs to be taken?
So the first step that needs to happen is the minister needs to allow the municipalities that have the technical and financial resources to actually pursue their own supply of electricity. Not to be reliant on Eskom all the time, to go and talk to independent power producers directly and say, I will purchase your excess supply. Let me use the example of Cooperative municipality in the Eastern Cape. Cooperative is Jeffreys Bay, Hankey, Humansdorp, Patterson area. and Patensi, not Patterson. And it's an area that has a lot of wind turbines. Now those turbines those wind farms have power purchase agreements with Eskom to supply a specific amount of electricity. There's an opportunity there for Coga municipality to purchase their excess supply and utilize that as a resource to feed into their distribution system and to offset their demand from Eskom. And incidentally, probably purchase it significantly cheaper than what they are purchasing electricity directly from Eskom. That's one thing that they could do.
James, as we were watching that, you mentioned, there's something that you want to add in respect of municipalities.
Just to add on to what Bridget was saying about extended periods of load shedding. So the electricity distribution grid was never built and designed for load shedding as we've seen it. So this means that grids are collapsing and transformers are blowing up.
It's like a load shedding wear and tear.
It's incredible, the strain. And if you've got municipalities that haven't been doing their repairs and maintenance for extended periods of time on their grids, there are some places in Joburg where transformers are more than 80 years old. If you are switching on and off at a regular frequency, as we are seeing, the strain and wear and tear on that ancient grid means that you are going to see these things blow up more frequently. And if you look at a company like City Power, the amount they spend, for example, on salaries and wages versus maintenance and new infrastructure, it's shocking, and it's an indictment of companies like that. So what I'm trying to get at is you've got many municipalities in the country which haven't been adequately putting in place new infrastructure. So you've got failing old infrastructure on the distribution side, and this load shedding is starting to break that down as well, to the same extent that you're seeing the Eskom power stations breaking down. And it's just a recipe for disaster. The other point I wanted to make about municipalities was debt owed to Eskom. So Eskom is in a financial hole, as we've explained, making huge losses, and their primary customers, one of the biggest customers, are municipalities. Municipalities outside the Western Cape are failing to keep paying Eskom. The amount of in arrears owed to Eskom by municipalities in an amount of about 33 billion rand, and it's increasing every year. It increases rapidly, and there
seems to be no plan. The minister is not saying
will. There's no political will, because if you don't have political will to instruct the people in charge of your municipalities that they have to pay their bulk service providers, not only Eskom, also your water boards in many of the provinces. If you don't pay those bills first, you're going to have supply challenges. You're going to have interruptions, and it's like kicking the can down the road. It just doesn't make sense, but it is happening in the Western Cape. This is public knowledge. The municipalities in the Western Cape, there's 2 of them or 3 of them that are in arrears with Eskom, and people can go and see for themselves which municipalities those are. But in general, it's something inside the Western Cape where there's a difference, because it's understood that we have to keep paying our bulk service providers, and we can't go into arrears with them. And it's just a common basic principle of good governance.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Kevin, we'd call that the DA difference, wouldn't we?
Absolutely, and I mean, you can see it. When you come to the DA-run municipalities in the Western Cape, they are paying their bills, they are maintaining their infrastructure, and yes, we have challenges, but generally speaking, things are a lot better where the DA runs, because we get things done. We make things happen to keep the lights on, to make sure that we are innovating. And we'll talk a bit more about that later on. But we are innovating in the way that we try and ensure that our citizens receive the basic services that they so desperately need.
So, Bridget, earlier we were saying that there are factors in a place like Joburg that complicate this whole load shedding business, and James explained about the load shedding wear and tear that happens and damages the grid. Is this the situation in your constituency?
Most definitely, Cilliers. You know, what is happening there is that obviously we have systems in place where I experience an outage, I then log a complaint, and then I get a reference, and then I wait, and then if it doesn't get responded to, and then I escalate it and things like that. All those systems have failed. this is why you get communities such as the communities that we are talking about here, the communities that have had to resort through my trying to say, guys, let's do a petition, because all these things are not working. Councillors.
There's no proactive maintenance
There's no
plan in
proactive
place.
maintenance. The meetings are being set with City Power. Meetings are being set between City Power and communities, but nothing happens after those meetings. And the councillors who are in these areas, because the communities think, well, I have my councillor that I voted for, so I should just tell them that I haven't had any response to my outage report, and so I must get my electricity. But that's not the issue. The issue is the problems within government itself. The systems have literally collapsed of attending to all these things. This is over and above what James is talking about the lack of political will at higher levels and things like that. But even at a local level, you would think that MMCs would do their jobs. You would think that, people at power, where this power is being distributed, would actually do their job. But the thing is, the whole system has collapsed. But the people don't care, because they have voted.
So you have
paying rates.
You have this reticulation system. It hasn't been maintained properly for
Exactly.
years. Then you have, as James mentioned, is never meant for load shedding. You get that extra strain, and then it just knocks power outages out of the schedule.
And to add to this, the increased costs of electricity and the increased demand and urbanization, more people moving into areas like Joburg North, elsewhere as well, Western Cape as well. You've got a huge amount of people illegally connecting to the grid. So you've got and this is what Eskom speaks about when it speaks about load reduction. So often they are they are in areas where the Eskom says that, we've got 100 registered users, but the demand is showing there's 1,000 or 2,000 people using the electricity on that grid. We have to reduce the load, and then they shut down the electricity feed to that area as well. Right. Otherwise, it will collapse. So you've got an enormous mushrooming as well around the country at the moment of people, desperate people who can't afford perhaps the massive amount of electricity, or are desperate for electricity, illegally connecting to the grids as well, which is adding further strain to the entire network. These are non-paying customers, very often connecting under very dangerous situations and circumstances, and it's very difficult for Eskom to manage that. Again, coming down to political will and the lack of political will to adequately address a situation like this, which is rapidly, in my view, spiraling, getting bigger and bigger, snowballing yet again, because Eskom and the national government seems to be blind to the reality that putting the costs are just increasing. There's no acceptance and understanding that people on the ground can't afford these kind of increases, and it's going to lead to people having to make other plans, and that is going to have a further knock-on effect on the entire situation. I just want to end by saying this following. Your question is about, is it possible to rid the country of Eskom? In my view, very shortly, no, it can't happen. Is it possible to get less reliant on Eskom? I agree with Kevin. Yes, we do need other players as well. The big problem is Eskom has always been the sole provider, 96% of electricity, and we need more players, absolutely, and Eskom's too bankrupt to do it themselves anyway. Are we going to get rid of rolling load shedding? In my view, certainly not in the next 10 years. And if we don't start taking the right decisions now, and we don't see the correct political will now at the highest levels, and an understanding for the realities, I don't see us getting rid of rolling blackouts at all.
So Kevin, just in closing, the point made by James, we got to start making the right choices. My mind goes back to what you said about Cape Town skipping entire stage of load shedding because of Styan Dam and the investment they made there. What's the prospect of Bridget's community getting that after some good decisions are made and some years of DA government?
So there are prospects, there are opportunities. However, we need to understand that storage, like the Styan Dam pump storage, isn't technically feasible everywhere. That's the first thing we need to understand. So then you've got to look at, well, if you can't store electricity or energy, how can you offset load shedding? And the answer is you've got to generate more locally. Okay? And in the case of a place like the city of Johannesburg, they've already got the Kelvin power station there, which is owned by City Power and to a certain extent offsets that. But there are other opportunities that they can bring on more generation, more own generation, or more independent generation, so that when you have load shedding from Eskom, you're able to supplement it with your own generation and offset it that way. Just going back to the whole municipal debate, the other completely non-technical thing that needs to happen is that you need to get your billing systems in place. You need to make sure that you are collecting the revenue for the electricity that you're generating, and that you're not overbilling or underbilling, because that's the only way we're going to address what James pointed out, the municipal debt to Eskom and municipal debt to other service providers that they face.
And that the money then goes to where it should go.
Absolutely.
That it's not going to new luxury motor vehicles, or it's not going to what, because very often in many municipalities, and that's where the budgeting process comes in, and people need to get involved in the budgeting in their local municipalities and see where the money's going to. Because you need to take your electricity money, first pay Eskom and the other service providers, and then you're always going to have an extra amount which you use. But at the moment, it seems like all of the money, the revenue is collected from electricity is going to everything else.
We've long said that electricity revenue should be ring-fenced for firstly paying your bulk supply, secondly your maintenance and improvement of your electricity infrastructure. Those are the two priorities. And after that, you can then say whatever surplus I've got left, I can look at other things. But pay your bulk supply and pay your maintenance and upgrading of your infrastructure.
Thanks very much, Kevin, for that parting shot and for the guests. I think the key takeaway here is that local government does have a role to play in protecting communities against the failure of national government and of Eskom. And later this year, we're going to the polls to elect our councillors and our mayors, and you have a role to play in that. You can make a difference. We'll be back straight after this. This week in DA-led towns and cities across the country. To keep providing quality services, the DA-led Hesseke municipality has added 3 new vehicles to its technical services fleet. DA-led George's Fire and Rescue Services are installing 500 smoke detectors and handing out fire blankets. And having got 53 vaccination sites up and running by Monday, the DA-led Western Cape government has prepared enough beds, oxygen and staff ahead of the impending third wave. On to this week's DA at Work feature. We are joined by Quinton Smit, the Mayoral Committee Member for Infrastructure Services at the Stellenbosch municipality. Welcome, Quinton. Kevin Mileham is still with us. So, Quinton, the Stellenbosch municipality has set this target of becoming the first municipality in the country to be free of Eskom. Obviously, it's not going to happen overnight, but the big question is, how will you achieve it?
So, yes, thank you very much, and Kevin, a warm welcome. Thank you very much for inviting me again. Well, we've been driven very hard by Kevin and his department, but we took the first step to become part of the Energy Resilience Program in the Western Cape. And we said that we feel that we have not only the capacity within our municipality, but we also have the necessary finances, and we have a huge knowledge base in Stellenbosch itself. We have the University of Stellenbosch, and we also have the CSIR. And they've already done a lot of studies in this regard to alternative energy exploration. And we've approached them and we said, if we can put together task teams. So what we've done is, first of all, we've established a steering committee, of which I'm the chairperson there. And through that steering committee, we've established smaller pockets of task teams. And each task team has a specific purpose. The one task team, as an example, is now currently focusing on methane mining. Other one will specifically work on solar exploration. And so does each and every one of those different task teams. That is how they're currently functioning. And that was our first step that we did, is to say that we have that capacity available in Stellenbosch. We have the expertise from the CSIR side and from the University of Stellenbosch. Let's get them all together in a room and let's put together these groups and see what we can come up with. And then obviously the political will, like you previously said, your previous speaker confirmed and said on several occasions there needs to be political will. That we have. We're now into our new budget cycle. And I'm glad to report that our executive mayor has been driving our budget to such an extent that with our new budget that will come into play in the new financial year now, we've already allocated close to 20 million, specifically just for one of the projects which will focus on rooftop solar panels.
So the thing is, it's not going to happen overnight.
No.
But you're taking the first steps to achieve own power generation capacity in Stellenbosch. So obviously this, if you achieve this, it will be an economic game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. Cilliers, I've said it previously as well, and on many occasions I've mentioned it to Kevin as well. I think one of the lessons we've learned from when we started with this whole process is that you need to establish between your short-term, your medium-term, and your long-term goals. A lot of people are saying, well, you can do this, it's fantastic. When are you going to start? How's it going to work? It's not that easy. You need to clearly identify your goals. You need to realize what is short-term possibilities, what can be achieved in the shorter term, and then the medium and the long term, because there's huge financial implications for that. Now, the spin-off, I would say, on the short-term projects that we're running, the spin-off from a job creation perspective will obviously be a lot smaller than it will from your medium or your long-term projects. I've listened to what you previously said, and the previous speakers alluded to the debt that Eskom is in. Now, I'm listening to...
It's not your problem.
No, it's not my problem, but I'm thinking on the flip side of it, if they in 400-odd billion rands worth of debt, if that's their debt book, can you imagine the job creation that must be lying there, that's available?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's obviously nationally. So
throttling the economy.
Yes. So for Stellenbosch, obviously, we want to see if we can bring our medium-term projects a lot closer to our short-term projects, because that will have a huge spin-off for job creation in our town and in our local area as well. But what is also important is I think we need to link up with our neighbouring municipalities in our areas. Yeah. To see if we link up with Drakensberg as an example, or any other municipality for that matter, if we link up with you, what project on a medium to long-term basis can we put together to generate electricity and then also job creation?
So that's an important point. It's not only Stellenbosch that's embarking upon this very, very important project. Kevin, tell us about what the Western Cape government is doing to assist municipalities like Stellenbosch to become free.
So this is exactly what is driving this initiative. The Western Cape Provincial Government have put in place what they call the Municipal Energy Resilience Program, and they've funded it with an amount of 70 million rand in this year's budget. And that's designed to help municipalities achieve a more independent state of electricity and energy supply. Now, there are a couple of factors that some of it is planning work that needs to happen. Some of it is energy efficiency. Energy efficiency, going to what Quinton was saying, is typically your short-term projects. It's where you can achieve impact quickly and effectively. So you're talking things like solar geysers or thermal insulation or LED street lights or whatever it might be. Those are the kind of energy efficiency projects that you can implement quickly and relatively easily to offset your demand, to lower your demand. Because you've got a supply and demand factor that you have to balance. So if you can lower your demand and at the same time bring up your supply, you can get to a point where they are in equilibrium and you are then independent of external sources of supply. So that's essentially the short term. What the Western Cape Provincial Government have said is here is a program that can help municipalities to develop their plans, to implement their plans, and to make it easier for them to go offline. So we've seen, for example, Stellenbosch are taking their initiative forward, but other municipalities, Oudtshoorn, George, Drakensberg, Overstrand, all are working on different projects to achieve similar goals. And they've got slightly different methodologies, and we're obviously evaluating them to see which are going to be the best practices and how we roll those out into other places where the DA governs, so that we can ensure that all the municipalities are ultimately
and the more
able to keep the
municipalities
lights on.
that do this thing, the better sort of the momentum that you can get
Absolutely.
for these
Absolutely.
And the volumes.
And it has a knock-on effect, because equally it offsets the demand from Eskom. I mean, the less that Eskom has to generate, because the municipalities are generating their own, the easier it is for them to keep the lights on.
Yeah. And it's a training ground for other municipalities. Given we spoke about that previously as well, is that what one municipality is doing is a learning curve for another municipality. Stellenbosch is currently, we're looking at methane mining. Now, I mean, methane mining, to me, I'm not the technical expert in that department, but we've got a team of guys currently working at our landfill site. We've got 4 cells, of which 3 cells are now full and completed, so they are done. We're now doing a 4th cell. So now, on those cells that have been there for years, that are now filled up to capacity, they're exploring methane mining now, trying to see how much methane they can actually tap out of those cells from landfill and create that into energy. So I think by the time that we finish with that exercise, Kevin, then other municipalities, we can basically pass on to
Here's
them
the best practice
and say, here's the best practice on methane mining. This is how you should be doing it, because we'll obviously make a couple of mistakes. Hopefully not. It's Stellenbosch, so we try not to make mistakes. But but I think that's a wonderful thing for other municipalities in the country, is that they can tag on to that.
The essence here, Kevin, it seems to be, is as national government is failing, South Africans are becoming more and more resourceful to look after their own needs. And the DA is leading the way. DA-led municipalities are leading the way.
Absolutely. If you want to see real change, you have to look at the DA-run municipalities. You have to look at the innovation that they are bringing to the table. You have to look at the service delivery levels. And, I mean, let's be honest, no government is perfect. But I'd like to think that where we govern so much better than anywhere else in South Africa. You can see it in the innovation that we're bringing to the table in terms of electricity generation, electricity efficiency, energy efficiency. Yeah, absolutely. And so it's things like having invested in Styan Dam in the city of Cape Town to reduce the impact of load shedding on the city and its economy.
Quinton, thanks so much for joining us again.
Thank you.
And good luck to Stellenbosch. And Kevin, good luck and thanks for what you're doing in Parliament.
Thank you.
We'll be back straight after this. That's a wrap. The first and only registration weekend for elections this year is taking place in less than 2 months. Visit check.da.org.za to check your registration status. If you're not registered to vote or you've moved house since 2019, this will be your only chance to make sure you can vote later this year. Don't miss out. Until next time, stay strong, South Africa.